It's summer 2026. Petrol and diesel prices are up, so running a traditional car is expensive. Is this just a glitch, a temporary situation, or will these prices remain a while? And if they are to remain, is considering switching to an electric car a sensible option at the moment? What are the indicators telling us at the moment about that decision? Well, that's what I hope to unpick today. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. Thanks for joining me on the electric transition. Today I'm going to talk through why fuel prices are up in a little depth, using that to consider when they might start dropping again, and look at a few car sales indicators that might help you decide whether now is a good time to buy an electric car. It won't come as a surprise to anyone that the reason fuel prices are so high at the moment is because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The US is waging war on Iran, and Iran in turn is using the narrow strait as a political asset, a way to hold the world to ransom, to gain some advantage, some support. Before the war, about 20% of the world's regular supply of oil came through the strait. While not much of that crude was destined for the West, oil is traded on international markets, so any disruption affects everyone. Because the cost of the raw material, crude oil, has gone up, then the cost of the refined products made from it goes up too, including petrol and diesel. Having said that, in the UK it is noticeable that diesel has gone up more than petrol, and that has several underlying reasons. Firstly, petrol is mostly used for cars, and some of the miles done in cars are for leisure, somewhat optional activities. When petrol prices go up, some people can, or have to, reduce their mileage a bit, easing the pressure on petrol supplies just a little. That's not so true of diesel. A lot of commerce and industry runs on diesel, and you don't want to reduce business mileage as that impacts the amount of trade done, and thus impacts profits for businesses. But there's more to it than that. In the UK, we're a net exporter of petrol. We refine more here than we use, but we are a net importer of diesel. Nowadays, we import about half of the diesel we use. Those imports mostly came from European refineries who do have some dependency on the oil from the Middle East because of its composition. Crude oil isn't the same all over the world. Its composition varies, with oil from the North Sea and America being classed as light crude, and oil from the Middle East being classed as heavy. Refineries are optimised for either light or heavy oils, and the proportion of resulting products varies based on the input oil type. Refineries using light oils produce more petrol, whereas those utilising heavy oils produce more diesel. So while we can buy some oil from America to make up for the oil not flowing from the Middle East, it's not the same class of oil, and it cannot be used by all of the world's refineries. So the best oil for creating diesel, those heavy crudes, is in shorter supply, but the use of diesel can't change much without affecting trade volumes, so its price will rise more than that of petrol. That's the simple and well understood economics of supply and demand. If supply goes down, but demand cannot be adjusted much in line with that, then prices rise until the two balance. The next thing we need to ask ourselves is, when might this end? Well, it's fair to say that it's not been the short conflict that the US President first suggested. Sadly, the Memorandum of Understanding came and went recently. What's more, there might be a small subset of people who want it to continue, as some American elites are making a lot of money from higher oil prices. I hope that is a coincidence. This surely wasn't a war waged by the USA for profit-making reasons. Even so, there are a few companies benefiting from these inflated prices, and it's difficult not to wonder if there might be lobbying to continue the hostilities for a little longer yet. What we have learned from the conflict, however, is that prices will not return to normal immediately once peace returns. We know that some fossil fuel infrastructure in the Middle East has been damaged by attacks, so that will affect peak production volumes there. And we've also learnt how many oil tankers are in transit at any moment. It takes time for a ship to be filled, to travel from its source to its destination, and we've run that constant drip feed of supply dry during the conflict. Many industry analysts are predicting that it will be months for supplies to return to normal, some saying longer than that, even when some form of agreement is reached. So we should expect these high prices to remain for some time to come. It could easily be the start of 2027 before prices drop back to previous levels, if not longer. In the UK, we have some additional price pressures on fuel prices on the horizon, namely fuel duty and CBAM. During the cost of living crisis of 2022, the government put a temporary reduction on the fuel duty applied to liquid fuels, a 5p per litre reduction in the amount of tax applied at the pump. That was supposed to end this year, slowly introduced in steps to make it more palatable, but because of the latest price shocks, that has been delayed again. Will that rise get reintroduced at a later point, in the next couple of years perhaps, or will the government manage to resist that somehow and do without that extra income? But the other pressure is CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This is a tax applied to imports into a region in order to avoid imports of goods with high carbon supply chains, undercutting local supplies with lower emissions. The UK's CBAM is expected to come into force in January 2027, although refined products such as fuels are exempt from it. However, UK refineries are worried about that. They want new taxes to be applied to imports to avoid local refineries being undercut by foreign imports and risking the long-term viability of the last 4 refineries we have left in the UK. If those new taxes were applied in the future, due to an expansion of the scheme, that would result in an increase in the price of fuels imported from outside of the UK. Imports which we've already said are needed to fulfil our demand, at least for diesel. So the price of liquid fuels suffer a number of headwinds over the next year or two. This is not just a short-term blip, and so it might be time to consider moving off them. Let's have a quick look at the savings that can be made by switching to electric. First, we need to see the costs for driving a car on liquid fuels, both petrol and diesel. These are calculated based on recent UK fuel prices from RAC Fuel Watch. Prices are pretty volatile at the moment, so these might not exactly match what UK viewers are paying when they see this, but it's best I have at the time of making the video. The average UK prices across all retailers are about £1.59 per litre for petrol and £1.78 per litre for diesel. However, averages at supermarkets are lower than those, at just over £1.51 for petrol and £1.67 for diesel, so I'm going to use those. Hopefully most viewers are using supermarkets as much as possible. Those prices result in these per mile costs, with different values based on the vehicle's efficiency. Pick out yours from the grid. They vary from 30.4p per mile for an inefficient diesel to 10.6p per mile for an efficient petrol car. Meanwhile, here are the prices for home charging an EV, from 12p per mile for an inefficient EV charged on normal rate electricity to well under 2p per mile for an efficient one charged on an off-peak overnight tariff. Remember to consider like for like, of course. Yes, an inefficient EV charged on a high electricity rate is a bit more expensive than an efficient petrol car fueled at a cheap fuel station. However, if you are in an efficient petrol car, then you are unlikely to switch to a hopelessly inefficient EV, so check the same areas of the tables for a fair comparison. What stands out to me when looking at these tables is how cheap an EV can be if you can charge overnight at home. And this fits with my own real-world experience, of course. Running my EV is really cheap. What you need to access any of these cheaper off-peak tariffs is simply home charging of some form and a smart meter. With just those, you should be able to access one of the cheaper tariffs available. What's more, those prices are based on current electricity costs before any reductions that the new government might introduce. Andy Burnham has already said he wants to reduce electricity prices, firstly by removing VAT from it. That doesn't make much of a difference. VAT on electricity is only 5%. But it sounds like it's just the start. He seemed to imply that he wants to do more in that regard, but he's got to work out how to fund it. That's the age-old problem, of course, so we'll see if he manages it. In slightly worse news, we are expecting the wholesale cost of electricity to rise in the near term due to the increased cost of the gas generation needed over and above the electricity generated by other sources. That's definitely an upward pressure on electricity costs brought about by the conflict in the Middle East, especially as the Northern Hemisphere heads into winter and needs to restock its reserves. The long-term trend of electricity prices, however, is downwards. There are several reasons for that, and going into them today doesn't really make sense. If you want to know more about why electricity costs will fall, more than I've already discussed in other videos, then drop me a comment asking me to discuss that further. And consider subscribing so you don't miss that if that topic is of interest. For the moment, however, just bear in mind that electricity prices will trend downwards in the long term. There's one other price to consider in relation to per mile costs of running an EV, and that's the 3p per mile tax being introduced in April 2028. That's 18 months away at the moment, so it's not relevant quite yet, but we should bear it in mind. The good news is that those who have an EV before that date will be able to delay that tax, if it's worth it, by renewing their VAD in March of 2028. As we discovered as a result of a change in April 2025, you can renew your VED at any time. You don't have to wait until it expires. Therefore, I expect a lot of EV owners to renew in March of 2028, delaying paying the new tax until March 2029. At the moment, there is no reason why that won't be possible, and I'd be surprised if there were by the time we get there. It is possible that this will change, but I'd say it's very unlikely. Just to finish off on charging costs, here is a grid of per mile costs when public charging. As you can see, this can be a lot more expensive than charging at home. The cost of public charging can vary a huge amount, so on this grid there are a lot more columns for the possible prices you might pay. If you can charge at home and you manage to afford an EV with a decent amount of range, say 200 miles or more, then the amount of charging you do on the public network is usually quite limited. However, if you don't have home charging, then things are more difficult. In some cases, there may not be anywhere near as much of a financial benefit to switching to an EV, and indeed in some cases it could be more expensive than driving on liquid fuels right now. Therefore, if you don't have home charging, then you need to carefully research the cost of charging in your circumstances. You may be able to use memberships and cheaper networks to make it financially beneficial, but it depends on what networks are near you. As with electricity, the trend for the prices we pay will be downwards in the long run. At the moment, we pay a lot to cover the borrowing being done to pay for new sites. However, as the rate of new installations starts to fall and borrowing on older sites gets paid off, that should become less of a burden and prices will tend towards being more reasonable. In the meantime, it might be the case of being patient for those without home charging. Levy-funded sites should be a bit more reasonably priced, but they don't exist in large numbers yet, so you might have to wait for them before you switch. When it comes to other running costs, those other than charging, EV costs are largely in line with internal combustion at this point. We had one year when EV insurance seemed to go up, but it has come back down again, at least for most cars. Some cars had effectively been a bit incorrectly classified, as a number of EVs are very powerful. New quotes for Teslas in particular took a fair jump for a while. It seems that the power of a Tesla was more than some new owners were prepared for, and they got written off at an alarming rate early in their ownership. However, those who have had them a while have no trouble, so they might be okay to insure these days. VED is as low as it can be, but no longer zero, and servicing is usually less than for a fossil-fueled car. Having said that, some dealerships seem to be keen to overcharge for servicing at the moment. Those who have found that to be a problem have the option of going to independent specialists, which can be a better option until those dealerships sort themselves out. A couple of quick words on car markets and what we can learn from them. New EV sales took another jump around the world in June, reaching 30% penetration in the UK, for example. 3 in 10 of the cars sold that month in the UK were fully electric. The government is offering grants on an increasing number of new EVs in the UK, and salary sacrifice schemes make EVs more affordable to many people. Both make the monthlies more reasonable for those able to afford new cars. Some manufacturers are doing very well against their ZEV mandate targets as a result of this jump, but others are still behind where they need to be. I expect the number of discounts and deals on new cars to be down in the next few months, but that's not to say that there won't be any. They will remain for those manufacturers who lag their mandate target, but might be more scarce for others. Meanwhile, in the second-hand market, several news outlets have reported that used EV prices are starting to head upwards. June saw year-on-year growth for the first time in 3 years in the UK, bolstered no doubt by buyers keen to escape recent surges in fuel prices. If that growth were to continue, then buying sooner rather than later would be wise. Second-hand EVs have been bargains for several years. You get a huge amount of car for your money, but we might be seeing that coming to an end. If that is the case, then depreciation of new cars will reduce, and that will be one less worry for those keen to minimise their overall outlay. Having said that, those getting their cars through salary sacrifice or leases don't need to worry about that anyway, as that's already factored into the monthly payments. Even PCP deals are largely immune to variations in depreciation, as the balloon payment is fixed at the start of the contract. As most new car buyers use salary sacrifice, leasing or PCP to get their cars, they aren't directly exposed to depreciation anyway. It's probably more of an issue for people who buy it as a company asset, but mostly affects those paying cash. Depreciation is likely to remain a bit of an issue, as its existence is partially artificial in nature. If people can buy a new car for less money, be it because of a manufacturer discount, using salary sacrifice to avoid tax, or with a government grant, then they are less likely to want a used car, which suppresses those used cars' prices. So I think the extra depreciation on EVs isn't likely to disappear completely just yet. It'll hang on in there while new car incentives remain, but it will be interesting to see if it remains lower than it was before due to the surge in demand that these higher fuel prices have triggered. In summary, petrol and diesel prices are up, and they are likely to stay that way for quite a while. Even if the conflict in the Middle East were to end straight away, prices would take several months to recover. Infrastructure needs to be repaired and ships begin to flow from the strait and to their destinations. Meanwhile, if you can have home charging, the savings from running an EV are even more attractive at the moment. Things are more difficult if you can't charge from home, and you'll need to do a lot of research to check whether something reasonably priced is available in your area. Some chargers are still free, but they are very rare, and I've only just had my first free charge after over 3 years of ownership. New car sales are at an all-time high for this time of year, and that might result in fewer manufacturer incentives at the moment, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any. Some manufacturers are well ahead of their ZEV mandate targets in the UK, but others are still quite a long way behind, so those who aren't doing so well will still be using all the tricks in the book to attract buyers. EV prices in the second-hand market are firming up, showing a small year-on-year growth in the UK. If that were to continue, then buying now might be wise. The final thing I'd say is that today's video has been all about money. The reduced costs of running an EV are only one of the benefits from switching. There are plenty of others waiting to be discovered for those willing to try. So there are my thoughts on whether now is a good time to buy an EV. But now I'm interested in your thoughts. Has this video given you pause for thought, or do you still have doubts? At what point does fuel become too expensive for you? Will you pay whatever the market demands, or does there come a point at which you can no longer afford to drive? If that were to be reached, what would you do? Let me have your thoughts in the comments section. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about the current fuel prices and their impact on you. If you've liked the video, then it is a big help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And I'd love to have you as a subscriber of the channel if you want to see more from me. Subscribing is free and helps ensure you know about any future videos I make. Finally, if you'd like to show your support for the channel, then there's a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the video description, as well as this QR code on screen to the same location. A drink would be very gratefully received. Thanks.